So we're going to talk about evil, which is a topic that we don't talk about enough in Christian circles in the church. I think it's something that is a mystery to us. We're afraid of it, or we've made it into this cartoonish kind of reality and not something to be taken seriously. But we should take it very seriously because evil is real. And evil shows up very early in God's bigger story. And so that's where we want to start today is really understanding evil from the perspective of the big story of the world and how God frames it and what he tells us about evil and how we ought to deal with it. And so if you go back to the very beginning of the story, is that, you have God who is outside of time, who's good, who creates everything in the world. And he creates the earth, and, he separates the land and the water. He makes beautiful vegetation. He makes this perfect garden for people to live in. It's a place of human thriving. And then he makes the man and he makes woman. Adam and Eve, we're told, are their names, and he places them in the garden, and it says he's with them in the garden. There's a beautiful line in the very beginning of Genesis that says that God himself walked in the cool of the day with Adam and Eve. And I've that image has always deeply resonated with me because it's a picture of what we know from the Hebrew text as shalom, which is this idea of ultimate peace. It's God's image for his world, that he desires to be with us in the place of flourishing that he created for us. And so that's the image we see in the very beginning of the story. And we don't know how long that sort of life went on, but we know that there was some governing rules to how God told Adam and Eve to live in the garden. And one of them was that there was a tree of knowledge and they weren't to eat from it. But one day they did eat from it. We're told that there was a serpent, a creature, but the creature was unique. He could talk, and he was very cunning and deceitful. And we know from the text that the creature was an embodied version of Satan, and that he tempted Eve, and that she ate from the tree, and then she gave the fruit to Adam, and then he ate from it as well. And at the moment that they gave in to this deception, and, just to pause for a minute there, like the first thing we learn about evil is that evil is a liar, that he is by his very nature deceptive, that he takes truth and twists it and confuses people. And so that's an important thing we'll come back to later. But we know from the story that they're deceived by Satan, and that at this moment their eyes are opened. And at that moment of their sin, which sin, it just means missing the mark. It means rebellion against God and his good intentions for us and the world that he made us. It says their eyes were open and they realized they were naked. And there's several other important words in that text. And it says that they ran and they hid. And it says they were naked and they were afraid. Mm-hmm. And so we see these concepts of nakedness and shame and hiding and fear exist for the first time ever in human history. And if we just pause there for a second, like this is a profound moment, because never until this moment has there been eyes darting, wondering who's watching, looking back and forth, not trusting. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden there's brokenness in relationship, and there's brokenness in relationship between the man and the woman. There's brokenness in the relationship between each of them and God himself. And so the nature of evil we see is deceptive, and what he leads the original people into is a place of nakedness and shame and fear. And the truth is we've been hiding ever since. And so this dynamic that happens in the garden is still happening in our lives. And this is why it's important for us to talk about, because as we're entering into our work in groups, as we're learning the true story of the world, as we're learning stories about each other, we have to realize this dynamic of evil hasn't gone anywhere. The same evil, Satan, and we're told he has demons, fallen angels that follow him and do his work, are still at work in the world today. And we know from the scriptures that they are calculating, that they're patient, and that evil is very personal in the way that it attacks and comes after. In the same way, it was very personal in the way that evil came to Adam and to Eve, first coming after Eve and causing a rift in their relationship and deceiving them in a particular way.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Can I back up? Because you talked a little bit about shame, and that to me, rewind a couple years, was a brand new word.
Yeah.
That was a word that I was like, I don't really understand what shame means, what it is. But as I've begun to unpack shame in my own story, I've seen it show up in various ways in big moments, and it's had a big impact on me. So I was wondering if you would just talk a little bit about shame for guys who may have been in that situation and are like, I don't know what shame is. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there's a difference between, though the words are similar, like guilt and shame. Guilt is I've done something bad. So I feel guilty, like, and maybe I should, because I did something I shouldn't have done. Shame, though, takes it to the next level and moves it to the realm of identity. And the message of shame is, I am bad. I am wrong. I am a mistake. So it's not just that I did something, but I am something. And so at that moment in the garden, when Adam and Eve are disconnected, the reason that this text tells us they were ashamed is because in that moment, it was their identity that was fractured. Is it wasn't just that they realized they had done something bad, and it was more than that. It was that they were something bad in that moment.
Wow.
Boom. Just drop the mic.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah. So I think when we're sitting with men, particularly in these groups, what we have to realize is all this is still at play. And so, the words we like to use is that we're being pursued by evil all the time. And if you call yourself a Christ follower, then at some point in your journey, you're going to be pursued by evil because, there's a calculating force, and he has a name. His name is Satan. Demons, and they have names, we know from the scriptures. And we know they're not all powerful. They're not like God, and that, they can't be everywhere all at once. But we know that they can be concentrated in physical geographic areas. We know that they can have intention to do harm to particular individuals. And so there's this very real reality that if you call yourself a Christ follower, you are being hunted by a personal calculating evil force that designs to destroy you.
Yeah.
And destroy your family.
I mean, you mentioned early on, but you've been in combat situations and in some pretty intense stuff yourself, but can you maybe translate some of that to help understand that feeling or that experience of being hunted?
Yeah, it's a surreal thing. I remember, I was a soldier for 5 years before I went to combat. And so, I spent 5 years training for the possibility of armed conflict. And so, I had played at the art of war many times, and been in lots of simulated exercises where there was an enemy force and, we were the good guys and there was an enemy force. And, we were pretending to have armed conflict, but the reality was it wasn't ever, your life was never on the line. And, I'll never forget the moment that, I was in Mosul, Iraq in 2004. And it was shortly after the invasion happened there. And there was a moment in that particular conflict when the insurgency started. And it was a particular day that I can remember. And, we were attacked from like multiple sides in a very calculated offensive that they were trying to overrun, our position in the city. And I remember that feeling. And I remember thinking like, we're being hunted and this is what it feels like. And it's nothing like when you're training. It's nothing like, the pretend combat.
Yeah.
It's not playing war. It's something different when you realize that there's men who are intelligent, who are present, and who have a design to take your life. And and so I think that like experience is definitely given color for me when I think about, that if we believe God and we believe his version of reality and the story, then we have to believe in evil too. And that means that there's a real personal calculating force that has designs to destroy you.
Yeah. Well, even when you use that word calculating and strategic, that helps me as well, because I think, again, in a kind of entertainment based culture, like we hear evil and we think of like these really in your face, like, demons in a horror film or something. And yet a lot of times deceiving evil is kind of hidden or not right in your face, or very nuanced, a little bit of a twist on something. And so I think it helps to be aware of that versus, oh, well, there's no such thing as evil, because I never see like these screaming demons, show up at my front door.
Well, I think what you said was being aware of it. And that's something that we most often are not, that we just overlook this. I mean, it'd be similar to being in a combat situation and saying, oh, there's an enemy out there somewhere, maybe, but we're just going about our daily lives here with, no awareness of that enemy and what they're doing and their moves. And I think, spiritually, we often take that position. We're caught up in our own story, and we forget that God's story is happening and this is a part of it, and it's out there and we need to be aware. And especially guys in these groups, because all of a sudden you're taking massive steps in your faith journey,
right,
and you're going to be popping up on the radar, so to speak, for this enemy that's going to be attacking you and wanting to discourage you from engaging in this process.
Yeah. And there's nothing more than that the enemy of our souls wants to do more than to distract us against understanding our true story. And so as we're doing story work, as we're helping other men engage their story, as we're helping other men understand the truth about who they are and what they're designed to be in the world, there's an enemy who wants to undo all of that.
Yeah.
And so the places that, I think we've talked about this idea of sharing feelings and sharing where we are and sharing what's going on in our life. And another reason that we concentrate on that work in these groups is the place where the enemy shows up too, because the place where you've experienced shame in your life, the place you experience fear, the place where you have believed lies about yourself because of things that have happened to you and continue to happen to you in your life, is the place, that's the foothold that, Ron, you're talking about. It's not these massive things that, Satan's going to do. It's going to be these insidious little lies that, he presents you with over and over and over. And if you're not with a group of friends who can say, you know what, that's a lie from the pit of hell, that is not true.
Yeah.
Then, we become lulled to sleep and we believe those things.
Yeah.
And you don't have, you can't recognize that as an individual,
right,
oftentimes. And I think that's where Satan wants us to be, is isolated and secretive and keeping, this evil or shame or whatever just tucked away in the dark, and festering, and not bring it out into the light in a group like this. Yes. And expose it and invite others into it. Because that, raises our awareness of, wow, there are lies that I'm believing that aren't true. And right. Christ has, spoken over these and is covering these, and my identity is in him and not in this shame or in this lie.
Mm-hmm. I mean, along with that, what are the other ways we kind of interact with or should handle evil, if it has this truth and this weight?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different aspects. I mean, one is what Ron's talking about, and it's the way that we address the work of evil in the lives of, our brothers that we're standing with. And that's the invitation in this group, is this is a group of brothers to stand with for a season. And so it's naming, for other people, hey, that is a lie, that because there's truth about who we are in Christ. And we're going to talk a lot about that in these groups, is like, what is my identity in Christ? What is it that the scriptures tell me that, like, if I've made a radical decision to say yes to Jesus and that I'm going to follow him, then, then certain things are true about me, and that I'm beloved, that I'm chosen, that, I don't need to do anything to earn God's favor. I already have it. But we all know that we spend huge chunks of our life trying to pursue favor and trying to earn our reputation. And so we'll see these dynamics at play. So I think like one of the first ways that we battle evil is in conversations with each other, by naming things that are true in the face of a lie. And we're going to talk a lot about this in these groups, that we all have core lies that we believe that are all tied to our stories. Like, I'll just give an example for me, is that, my core lie is that I don't belong. And we don't have time in this format to get into it. You guys both know, a lot of the details of my story, and it's tied all the way back to childhood. But then it was affirmed over and over again, this lie that, like, see, Gabe, you don't belong. Well, it's not an accident that core lie that began in my childhood and continues to present day, right? I had an incident last week where I very much believed that,
Yeah.
Why is that? It's because there's a calculating evil present. So what I need is brothers who can see what's going on and speak against that.
Yeah.
I'll say too, just on that, I mean, just like we talked about earlier with thanking someone for sharing and covering them in that way, this is another form of covering someone, is speaking a truth, no matter how simple it may sound, to someone, using their name, or, just reminding them, like, hey, Gabe, you do belong. Hey, you are loved. Hey,
That's
and
right.
I think that's so powerful, and a tool that we don't use quite often in church and in any of these circles, is just to speak truth over men and women who are believers with us, and combat evil in that way.
Yeah. Well, because I think just to say for a minute, like in church, most of our kind of programmatic design is to speak general truth. So we preach general truth, we teach general truth, but what we're talking about is particular truth. Is that there's particular truth that Steve needs that addresses directly the lie that he believes about himself. The reason that he feels shame, the reason he feels he's not enough, the reason he feels like he's unlovable, or whatever it is, there's a particular truth that needs to be spoken in a particular moment. And you have to be close. That's a close fight,
That's
Yeah.
good. That's
Yeah.
good.
That's the hand-to-hand versus the long range. But it also highlights why it's important to understand that evil is personal and calculating. That means that truth, to combat that, personal and calculating, needs to be personal and calculating, which the general truths are not. So it's hard to then translate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Steve, you asked, how do we engage it? And I, said the first way is that we speak truth to one another in a very particular way that undoes the work of evil. But the second thing is prayer. I think that's very clear in the example of Jesus himself. There's a moment when Jesus says to Peter, he says, Simon, Simon, Satan has requested to sift you like wheat, to test you, to put you through hardship. And he says, I'm praying for you that you would endure, right? And that you would return and that you'd be faithful in your ministry to your brothers. And so that's the example of Christ himself and how he deals with evil. Is he doesn't say, I'm stopping evil, right? And it's where now we know in the grand story, like he is going to stop evil once and for all at some point, but we live in a point in human history where evil is very much at work. And I think we're to follow the command of Jesus to pray for one another, which we don't do enough. At least I don't know how you guys think about prayer, but I know that's not been like the strongest aspect of my Christian journey.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes in groups like this, or in previous Bible studies or small groups that I've been in, if you think about prayer, it's usually tacked onto the end of the time. Hey, let's go around real quick. Any prayer requests for the week? And then, it could be a person's aunt or their cat's sick or something like that they're not bad things in particular.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about this subject, and in particular the personal aspect of it, I mean, I think locking shields with your brothers in prayer is actually, one of the main ways to combat evil.
Absolutely.
Speaking truth over them, praying with them, praying for them, and naming those things in the group is powerful.
Yeah, it gets back to the unhurried space that we create with this group. Because what did you say at the beginning? Well, at the end, let's real quick go around the circle. Well, the key word there is real quick. So what does everyone do? They throw out something that's real quick to say. If I was to pray, about a real thing I'm struggling with, there's no time for that. So I think in some ways we get into those, like, we fall into those traps because we're so rushed in those settings, or maybe because we haven't been able to truly open up.
Yeah. One of the things I've found that's worked well in our groups is actually taking a third space, we've called it.
Nice.
We have the group meeting, and maybe it's in person, and then maybe, we do an online element as well. But there's a third space, which is throughout the week. How are you engaging these guys? You can't interact as much as we'd love to every day and sit in a group for an hour, but there are ways that you can engage, and one of them is using technology.
It's really smart. I like that. Even the naming of it helps. It frees it.
Yeah.
It immediately feels freed up a bit.
So our guys have, we have a group text. I mean, that's been the mode that we've used. And it's been amazing for this very thing. Guys will update it mainly with, hey, this is, I spoke about this thing. I asked you guys to pray for this thing. Here's the latest update. Or I had this conversation today with a family member that was really hard. Can you guys pray for the next one, or pray for me as I go into it? And that's been a great way in real time to engage, this group in a way that's actually benefiting them as they step into the world and live lives. And it's easy. I mean, it's something that's it takes a little bit of intentionality to put it out there. And I've used some voice memos, and things too. But it's been such a great place of community to just continue those conversations.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant concept.
Yeah, I'm stealing that one.
It's like, we call that asynchronous communication, I think, right?
Hey guys, I'd like to create an asynchronous communication channel.
Yeah. Don't use that language.
About third space.
Yeah, I like third space much better.
Yeah. Well, to me, this also reminds me of something I've learned through this, that evil wants to stay hidden. And so we have to do the work of exposing it in order to work through it and find healing.
Yeah.
And like Gabe, you mentioned guilt and shame, and both get dealt with through exposing and working through it. So anyone who's experienced like good counseling or therapy or anything, like they've experienced this exact process of like expose it and work through it. Don't go around it. Don't just suppress it. Like that was my default mode for a long time. And so to me, one of the things I love about the group setting is it created that regular place to be able to expose. Because I think ideally this would happen every day in our lives with people we're close to. But to your point, Gabe, we're busy, and that's not always reality. I'm not like running out the door in the morning trying to get to work and kids to school and stuff and be like, hey, by the way, like, this is something I feel really shameful about. That's not exactly always realistic or how it is, even if I want it to be. So to have this kind of carved out space, I think you used the word sacred earlier, like a sacred space where, hey, for at least this period of time, we're going to intentionally do this thing. And then maybe it builds a muscle that allows me to do it more often than just that.
I'll add too, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, but just the way the evil is so personal sometimes, in particular with these groups, is shocking, but when you're able to recognize it, like, oh, hey, it's group night. All of a sudden, my calendar's busy and I'm worn out and I don't want to go. And it's so easy just to check out, and I think just continuing to be aware of that's going to be a present reality for these guys as y'all are in groups, is really to say, man, it's always easier to not go. It's always easier to not show up, either being fully present, even if you're there physically, or not there physically at all. But the challenge is going to be, man, fight against that. Pray before you go in. Ask guys to be praying for you and with you if you're having a hard week, and make it a priority. But it's going to take sacrifice, in order to prioritize this.
Yeah, it's not. This isn't a convenient work. And remember, we talked about the idea that our culture is built on efficiency. And one of the reasons this is hard, and why we like do an intentional ask to each guy that's invited in, is because it's not an easy thing to do, and it requires commitment and sacrifice to do it. And the reward is great if you stick with it and stick in it.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say on evil?
I mean, I think just this last thing, that we're, I think as men designed to be protectors. I mean, that's part of our nature and it's part of our role. So I just like to challenge us to think of ourselves in that way spiritually, because I don't think we think about, like, I think, I use the sort of image of physical threat. Like, I sort of had the epiphany of, what this looks like in the spiritual realm, because I was actually in actual combat situation. So I can, in my mind, go back to that, actual experience that I had and say, man, like that there's a connection here. And what I experience physically actually is true spiritually right now. And I have to keep reminding myself of that. Maybe some people haven't had that experience, but I think we can all relate to the idea of, like, we feel like we need to defend our homes. Like the idea of, that our home could be broken into is a very real idea. I think we've all thought about that, like, what would I do, kind of thing. And so I think one little exercise is to imagine that, there is like the most violent, vicious person that you can ever imagine that hates you and knows everything about you and is standing outside of your house trying to get in. And if that was true, like, what would you do? How would that change the way you functioned and related to that person outside of your home? And I think, like, that's a very real image, that there is an evil force all around us, and that has the ability to destroy and undo, and has that design. And so to take it seriously, to acknowledge it in our conversations with each other, but also to, like, enter into the sacred work of prayer, and to do that seriously, and to do it every day, and to do it as a first thing, not a last resort, and not just to pray for your aunt's cat, but to pray for strength that we might resist temptation. And that's the primary thing we're called to pray for, is like that we might resist temptation, that we might stand in the face of evil, that we might be faithful and endure and stay the course, and not give in to the lies, but instead believe the truth.